Hello, good evening to you. Welcome to the Saroy channel. I'm so delighted that you've joined me this evening. It's going to be such a lovely story and I think you're really going to enjoy it. And it definitely gives you the question, well, is there something supernatural about Bigfoot? And in this story we hear about a Bigfoot that actually is seen around a fire. Now I have heard few stories of Bigfoots and fire, which really does make you think how incredibly intelligent this animal clearly is if he is able to make fire. So let's get started. I think you're going to enjoy this story. And before we go any further, let me remind you that if you haven't subscribed, please do so. I'll be so glad if you do. So let's get started. Dear Sarah and all your listeners, my name is Sally Ann and my Bigfoot encounter happened 10 years ago when I was 15 years old. I grew up as a single child in a very wealthy home where I never wanted for anything and life seemed incredibly good. My parents lived on a luxury estate on Lake Oswego in Oregon, and for the first 12 years I had such a loving home life. My mother and I were incredibly close, so when she sadly died from colon cancer on December the 12th, 2008, my heart was well and truly broken. My dad did not cope with my mother's death at all well. He would shut himself in his office or retire to bed early, and I was left alone with our Latino housekeeper, who was the only spark in my sad little life. Even though I had everything, I would have given it all up in a heartbeat to have my beautiful mother back. I began to hate and despise our beautiful home because it was a haunting reminder of happier times I had spent with her. And suddenly our large home was like a noose around my neck. I had friends, of course, rich ones, who wanted to indulge themselves at lavish social events, while I just withdrew from the world like a tortoise in a shell, and subsequently had very little to do with them. Sometimes I would stand in our huge, beautiful kitchen, and you could have heard a pin drop. My home had become so deadly quiet that even a mortuary may have had more life than our home did. One day when my dad was a little more like his old self again, he told me that he was getting remarried. The moment I met my stepmother, I knew she was a budding social climber that was marrying my dad for money and not for love. I even told him that I could see through her, and my dad reminded me of how lonely he had become. He told me that wife number 2 did not measure up to my mother, but he said he just could not bear the agony of being alone for a moment longer, and this lady surely had some lovable qualities. Clearly, I didn't see them. I did not like anything about Nikki, and I promise you she did not like me. The feeling was mutual. I was not even a bridesmaid at their wedding because Nikki insisted she only wanted little flower girls walking down the aisle with her. And I knew it was because she just did not want me to be her bridesmaid. Once my father was married to Nikki, she showed her true colours, and believe me, they were dark. This woman was so hostile to me, and if I said anything back to her or stood up for myself, then I wasn't even allowed to eat anything. On several occasions she would lock me up in my room without explanation, and one day I caught her having intimacy with our gardener, who was a very handsome young man. As time went by, she became nastier and nastier towards me, and the verbal abuse was insane. I do not even wish to put those insults to paper. I don't want to give them the light of day. I have a tough skin, so I could take on more than the average person. But one day, enough was enough, and I had to get away from that evil woman. You would think as a rich girl I would have access to my dad's funds like most rich girls do. Not me. Nikki had frozen my bank accounts and confiscated my pocket money, and my father had agreed to all this because she told him all kinds of lies about me. Your daughter needs some tough lessons, she told him. She's a spoilt, self-centered brat. In front of my father, Nikki was a different woman and treated me sweetly. But once his back was turned, out came her pitchfork and her snake-like tongue. Only our Latino housekeeper, who was at the receiving end of her abuse as well, knew how terrible Nikki really was. And my father was also just a victim, as we all were, and she had him under her witch-like thumb. I decided I was going to run away, but I had nowhere to go. I did not have friends to stay with, because after my mother died, I withdrew from all those friendships. I decided that I would go and camp in a nearby area of national forest that I knew well from the past. I knew that it would be the perfect hideaway, and so I got all the camping gear together, like sleeping bags, tents, torches, pot, fire starters, fishing rod, and I rifled through the pantry for all our tinned food, and I stuffed everything in a backpack and left the house just like that. I had enough money to get a taxi ride to the forest, which had hiking trails for walkers and even areas where there are man-made fire pits. I made sure I veered away from all those trails because I wanted to find a remote spot away from prying eyes. For the first week of camping, I can honestly say that I have never felt more alive in my entire life. I knew how to fish and had successfully caught some big fish without much trouble, and so I knew that come what may, I wasn't going to starve. I had come familiar with the wildlife, and being close to nature was very therapeutic for me. I was even having dreams about my mother that just brought me so much peace and comfort. One night I saw a crackling fire very close to my campsite, which was weird because people did not tend to camp in the most remote spots unless they were extremely adventurous. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided I would go and take a peek to see who this person was. It was relatively dark, but there was a little moonlight filtering through the trees, and armed with my torch, which I avoided using as much as possible unless it was necessary, I crept up close to the camp. I was surprised to see there was no tent up, nor was there a hammock, but sitting by this fire was the hugest creature I have ever seen in my entire life. When I say huge, I mean huge. We're talking about a creature who's sitting on the ground. His torso is about 4.5 feet off the ground. So imagine how massive this thing would be if he was to stand up on 2 legs. The creature had a distinct bullet-shaped head, and he had an ape-like face. But something about his face and body were human, although I cannot really say what. His whole body was covered in black hair, apart from his face. I watched him staring into the fire just like a human would. And what amazed me is that about this creature, whatever it was, it had known how to make that fire. What animal on this earth knows how to do that? I was amazed. I'd never seen an animal like this before, and I think my awe and shock at what I was seeing took away any fear. I should have been deathly afraid of this formidable creature, but all I could do was just stare and stare in awe. What the heck was this animal, I wondered. The creature swatted away some mosquitoes that were irritating him, and then he turned around and looked at me. Our eyes met, and for a moment, frozen in time, I felt a bizarre connection with him. Maybe both of us understood the meaning of being truly alone, or maybe this creature had a family, and I wondered about that. Isn't it odd I'm facing an enormous predator and wondering about his family? I know it sounds super crazy, but it felt as if the creature was reading my mind. He looked at me with a keen interest and a curiosity. What was weirder still was he did not seem at all surprised to see me. It was almost like the meeting had been preordained, almost as if he had been expecting my visit. I moved forward and stood by the fire, and we both stared at the flames for a long time. Finally, I gathered my senses together and walked away, and the creature watched me as I left, and I could swear I saw him nod. When I got back to my campsite, I felt so elated and uplifted, I can't explain it. I felt like I had been so privileged to meet this wizened creature, whatever he was. And I knew that this was a creature that had never been recorded by science. That night as I slept, I saw my mother in a floating white dress, holding the huge hand of this creature that I had seen earlier by the fire. The creature spoke to me in the dream, "Go back home, your father needs you." I woke up from the dream startled. It had seemed so vivid and so real. I felt certain that I needed to listen to the creature. I felt as if he had spoken to me through my subconscious mind. The next day I returned home with the help of some kindly people on the trail who allowed me to phone my dad on their cell phone. When I did get home, I rushed into the arms of my dad, and we both just sobbed and sobbed. My father said the moment that I had left, he just knew it was because of Nikki, and even the housekeeper had confided in him how dreadful Nikki had been towards me. I told her to leave immediately, he said, and I'm filing for divorce. The house, for the first time in ages, began to feel like the home I had once loved. My father told me that he had a bizarre dream the night before I returned. I saw your mother in a floating white dress, and there was this giant hairy ape with her, and he was holding her hand, and he looked at me and said, "Sally Ann is coming home. Keep strong." I had never believed in the supernatural, but everything seemed so weird to me because events flowed in such an extraordinary way that I began to wonder that whether there was something outer-worldly about the encounter with the hairy man that I know now to be a Bigfoot. I hope you enjoyed my story. P.S. I'm sure your listeners would like to know that my father is now married again to an amazing woman called Molly, who reminds me so much of my late mother. My father is smitten by her and I adore her. She's a second mother to me. Until next time, good night and goodbye.